OG Anunoby in a lot of rumors leading up to the NBA trade deadline. Would it be the right move for the Toronto Raptors to trade OG Anunoby? Would it be signaling a rebuild, or is it more of a retooling around Pascal Siakam? What would be an appropriate return for OG Anunoby, and some trade examples? We're going to break down all of that for you coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Jaren Jackson Jr. to have less than 5.5 blocks? Or what about Ja Morant to have more than 2.5 dunks? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players, and they score more or less than their Prize Pick projection. You can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. That's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, you name it, they've got you covered over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe. They offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is Sean Woodley, the host of Locked On Raptors. You can find wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Raptors. Now, Sean, OG Anunoby's name has been in the rumor mill a ton leading up to the NBA trade deadline, and depending on whether or not Kevin Durant finds himself on the block in the aftermath of the Kyrie Irving trade, you could pretty easily argue OG is the number one guy available for teams looking for that piece to kind of get them over the hump. But before we kind of get into what a trade for OG would actually look like, is trading OG the right move for this Raptors franchise?
It's hard to say, because right now, Jackson, I don't know if there's like an obvious next move for the Raptors. Like, I don't know if there's one thing that's going to, set them on the right track, fix what's gone on in a truly horrible season, where I think they've pretty inarguably hit one of their lowest possible outcomes this year. And, there could be the argument that you don't do anything, that you stay steadfast with, the hope that you get some internal development from guys like Scotty Barnes and Precious Achiuwa. And maybe you get the leap you were hoping for this year, next year, just kind of on a bit of a delayed timeline. But when it comes to OG, I do think I've come around on this being the move for the Raptors, because I do think it is what sets them up best for next season. You can go and trade OG for players who are established. You can do players and picks, maybe younger project players. You can do all picks if you want. Either way, it's going to give you ammunition to go make moves in the offseason or rebalance your roster in a way that is badly needed for a team that doesn't have a whole lot of roster balance. The Raptors have made their whole identity, all of our players are the same size. Well, guess what? When all your players are the same size and very similar in skill set, there's a lot of overlap. The fit gets very hard to manage, and you have very clear, glaring skill sets that you don't have on the roster, like point guard play and shooting and playing defense and being tall. These are the things the Raptors don't have a ton of right now. And so I think trading OG, who is, I think, easily the most valuable of all the guys who are rumored to be available for the Raptors right now, Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., they're pending free agents. They're not quite as easy fits with any sort of team the way OG is. And I think because you have a wide open contender field right now, a lot of whom could fancy themselves one OG away from being a true title favorite, I think there is a very good chance the Raptors get an offer this week that's too good to pass up. And if I'm the Raptors, I'm probably pulling the trigger on that deal by Thursday with OG.
So what at this point then, if you're now on board with the idea of the Raptors moving on from him, and you touched on it a little bit, the return here is what will ultimately signal whether this is maybe a rebuild for the Raptors or kind of leaning that direction versus a retooling of sorts. So what would be the ideal return then in your eyes for OG Anunoby at this point?
I think if you can get young players who you can theoretically envision as the core future guys around Scotty Barnes, or even just contributors to a team where Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam are your clear core players, I think that works for me. Obviously, picks are helpful too, but I don't think I'm super into the idea of just like an entirely picks-based package. I think this Raptors team needs to use OG Anunoby not in a dissimilar way to the way they traded Rudy Gay back in 2013, which, you know, Rudy Gay was clearly the best player in that deal between them and the Sacramento Kings, the deal that famously set the Raptors on their track that eventually led to a title 7 years later. That deal was trade Rudy Gay, who is very talented, has a lot going for him, but doesn't fit on this roster. Trade him for players who can better balance the roster, maybe some guys who can grow into being something bigger than they are right now. You know, as far as actual players, my sort of dream trade, and this is not ever going to happen, but just hear me out. OG Anunoby for Tyrese Maxey, PJ Tucker, and Daniel House. The money is exact, $17.3 million. OG comes in as the ace defensive wing that the Sixers could use next to James Harden, next to Tobias Harris. Obviously, you lose the scoring punch of a Tyrese Maxey, but that's the kind of deal I think the Raptors should be looking at. You could even make that bigger and do like Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey for OG and Gary Trent Jr. So you still get some shooting and offense coming back if you're the Sixers. Look, this is a pipe dream. It's not going down, but that to me is the kind of move that I would love to see, a move that gets differently skilled players in the door, preferably some sort of lead guard, especially if you're moving on from Fred VanVleet and you need that extra ball handling and playmaking infusion into your lineup. But if you can turn OG into actual players who better make sense on this roster, maybe a couple of players who rebalance things a little bit, I think that's the ideal move here. And there's lots of teams that could fit with. I think the Knicks can offer some interesting players with Emmanuel Quickley, Obi Toppin, Isaiah Hartenstein, that type of guy, those types of guys. But as far as ideal packages out there, I do think it has to involve decent players or even good players coming back to help rebalance things.
Yeah, there are. I mean, you just mentioned obviously a couple Eastern Conference teams that could potentially be in play for OG. It feels like more than half the NBA is probably picking up phones right now calling about OG Anunoby. There are a bunch of Western Conference teams that have been linked with interest: the Grizzlies, the Pelicans, the Suns. Maybe a bit of a bidding war kind of starting up for OG at this point. Are there any, potential examples of hypotheticals that you have for any of those teams that I just mentioned?
If you can pry, I think the guy that I have circled, if it's not going to be Tyrese Maxey, which fine, it's not going to be Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah, but pipe dream, we'll set it aside.
Yeah. I think if you can somehow pry Trey Murphy III away from the New Orleans Pelicans, I feel like that would be just like the perfect type of player to throw into the Raptors roster. You get a younger version of a wing type player that OG is. Obviously, Trey Murphy is not the defender that OG is, because maybe no one on the planet is the defender OG is at the wing. But you get shooting, you get a young player who has some, potential to grow into as well. Obviously, that will come with other picks and salaries and whomever else you throw in there. Devontae Graham could be a guy that gets moved in there as a way to, incentivize the Pelicans just to get off that contract, which I'm sure they don't want to be paying. So Trey Murphy stands out as a guy. And another one that I've kind of thought of, Anthony Simons with the Portland Trail Blazers. The Blazers are rumored to have coveted OG, obviously, at the draft. Lots of rumors out there suggesting they offered the 7th overall pick, which became Shaedon Sharpe for OG Anunoby. I wouldn't have done that deal at the time if I were the Raptors. One pick for OG, I don't think was doing it. And I think they've, kind of been proven to be right that there's a bigger market out there for him if they want to move him. And I think if the Blazers are looking at reorienting their roster, that Dame Simons backcourt, it's got all the same problems the Dame McCollum backcourt had. It's just younger. I wonder if maybe this is a chance for the Blazers to reorient things. You bring Anthony Simons into the Raptors, and it's not like a perfect fit. He's a very bad defender. He might never be even an okay defender. That's certainly something you have to accept if you're the Raptors and reckon with. But if maybe that's the thing you can do, get an established lead guard in Anthony Simons. Maybe he makes it more palatable to trade both Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent Jr. at the deadline, because you have that ball handling to pair with Scotty Barnes and Pascal Siakam going forward. That's an interesting one to me. Who knows if it happens? I would doubt that it does, just because that's a big deal for a couple of teams to pull off in the middle of the season. But those are a couple of other Western Conference options. But like you said, there's so many teams who want OG, rightfully so. And if you're the Raptors, you have to at least second guess yourselves a little and be like, if everyone wants this guy, should we be trading him? Because there is a downside to it, right? You could trade OG, it could backfire on you. You could spend the next 15 years being like, man, I really wish we had a guy like OG Anunoby on the roster, and it could become like a Babe Ruth type curse. Really, this is a Raptors team that's never had good small forward play, and it's a big decision to move on from a guy as good as OG is. But those are some of the potential outcomes I could see if they do end up pulling the trigger by Thursday.
Will OG Anunoby still be a Raptor after the NBA trade deadline passes? Are the Raptors trying to retool or angling toward a rebuild? Of course, y'all have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Raptors. Sean, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Anytime, man.